Hi there, I'm Doug. I wrote the book The Guardsman under the pen name of R.G. Taark. Today we are on episode 46 out of 48. We are on chapters 114 through 117 today. When you get a chance, please hit that like, subscribe, and comment button. We'd love to hear from you. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Thank you very much.
The Guardsman, Book 3, Wrath and Retribution, Episode 46, Chapters 114 through 117. Chapter 114. The team calm chirped in the silent tension of the stairwell they occupied, and their squad leader slapped the acknowledgement button. He shouted a silent but profound curse. Jonas and all the other eyes in their team were all looking back at him in that instant, fearing that their position was compromised. The League guards, who were stirred by the first ping from the Hegemony General notification of fire mission availability, asked each other who had brought their personal comm unit with them on duty. They lazily called each other liars, as no one confessed to the infraction. The dragging hours of duty were wearing on them in the depths of the dark, miserable morning. While the drowsy conversation degenerated into half-hearted accusations and demands of each other to shut the hell up, Jonas pulled a grenade out of his pouch. He pulled the pin under his furious, embarrassed, and red-faced squad leader's nose. The older soldier looked up with a hard face and demanding eyes. Keeping quiet, Jonas nodded from the grenade in his hand to the opposite wall and jerked his head and eyes back over his shoulder into the alcove with the duty desk. The desk was recessed into the wall and tucked away in that alcove that guarded and blocked their objective while providing excellent cover against small arms fire. They all heard the chair squeak as one of the guards stood, cursing the others for lazy asses, while telling them he would check himself. The angry staff sergeant pointed to the satchel charge with Jonas Corporal. He pressed a free finger to his lips, telling everyone to be quiet, and pointed with his chin to the door at the far end of the corridor and the two standing guards. His corporal primed the 20-second fuse and started it burning. One of the guards grumbled to the other three, by the voice probably the one who'd stood from the chair, "Idiots. Just because we're at the vacation home doesn't mean y'all need to go on vacation. Y'all are getting all dick-brained and stuppet too." The damn team calm chirped a second time. The guards cursed and all came to full alert. Jonas lets the spoon pop loose, catching it in his fingers and counting to 2 before tossing the grenade underhanded up the last few stairs and into the hall. The grenade was in the air while they heard the rattle of weapons and equipment being made ready, followed immediately by the metallic bouncing sound of the grenade off the far wall and into the alcove. He heard the metal body of the round grenade bounce off the rock floor and the shouted grenade from the guards. He ducked back, dropped the spoon, and covered his ears in rapid succession. When his back hit the stone wall of the stairwell, his corporal heaved the 20-pound satchel charge with the cooking fuse into the hallway and down at the standing guards by the door. Jonas never saw them as they were raising their rifles and beginning to rip rounds at the new target. He did see the results of their large caliber, shredding rounds rip his corporal into meat as blood exploded from his torso front and back in front of his eyes. The grenade went off with a resounding whump before his corporal had fully fallen to the stairs. Even while rock dust was in the air from the grenade, the League guards were firing down the hall. They filled the air before the downward turn of the stairs with hypersonic railgun rounds that slashed the air into incandescent white, each round pinning a tiny lightning bolt into the rock wall while blasting sharp chips of rock back out at them. A second later, the satchel charge blew, silencing their shots, while ripping them to pieces through their armor and scattering the bloody pieces along the hall, the corridor, and down the stairs. From what sounded like very far away, Jonas heard his squad leader shout, "Go!" They all surge forward behind Jonas in that instant and sprint into the chambers, past the shattered rock opening where the door once stood locked and guarded. Their target and wife are scrambling and disoriented in the dark and confused with bloody ears. The man managed to hit a button on a frame by the fireplace, and the back behind the low burning fire opened. Jonas lunged and tackled him, smashing his face on the rock, but dragging the larger, older man down with him anyway. He was dragged off CEO Riedesel by his teammates designated to secure their target and the wife. He spent a second shaking his head to clear the stars from smashing his face on the stone, not really knowing who he was. It never hurt that badly when he tackled someone playing speedball on the court. He shook his head again, and Jonas felt his squad leader pat his back. He was pushed in the direction of his team sergeant instead of receiving a third pat on the back. With blood running down into his eyes, he and the specialist next to him were instructed to retrieve their corporal's body. The world is moving around him in a daze as he is watching his body move like it's under the control of someone else. Only hours before Jonas had committed his first ever crime with his corporal when they stole the dive gear. He did not even know his first name. He only knew him as Corporal. He was still alive, but in really bad shape as they dragged him up the stairs. They could not treat him where he was on that exposed landing with League reaction teams on the way. They had to get him to a more secure area for their medic to work on him. Once back, his sergeant grabbed him by the scruff of his neck to stop him from going past. He removed the demo that Jonas was carrying. The specialist next to him saw and did the same as their corporal showed some life and groaned in pain past the deflating wheeze in his lungs. He was squirming to get flat or move away from the pain. The CEO and wife were stacked, tied, and barricaded under guard in the corner of the room to the left as they entered the room. They were secured on the opposite side of the room from the propped open fireplace secret passage. They dragged their corporal to the safety of the room as their squad leader and team medic from the other team started working on him. They had one man on guard and one fortifying the entry. Jonas was called to his team sergeant. Their remaining team of 3 headed back out of the confusion with his team sergeant. The first thing they did was to set a tripwire claymore behind the wreckage of the shredded desk, pointed towards the stairs, with the tripwire strung across the hall's security alcove corner to the stone wall on the far side. Amazingly, one of the armored guards, bleeding from every ruptured seam in his armor, moved to lift his rifle. Jonas watched in disbelief as his team sergeant backed a step and kicked open the guard's cracked faceplate, blocked his right arm and rifle with his knee, and fired a 3-round burst into the guard's face. He was so close when he fired that the muzzle flash did not even leave his compact assault rifle as the rounds ripped the bloody mass open. The sergeant turned covered in blood below the chest, and with cold eyes snapped at them to get back to work. They laid the tripwire at the stair-side corner of the alcove to the opposite wall, and then plugged it into the claymore under the wreckage. They stepped over the tripwire and down the stairs to the landing. Their team sergeant also placed a remote detonated claymore behind the battery-powered exit sign where the landing turned right and down the stairs to the lower levels. The exit sign was the only piece of tech other than lighting in the whole place as far as Jonas could see. There were not even security cameras that he could see inside. It was all like some kind of crazy dream. He never imagined he'd see, let alone be in, a castle. Jonas asked as they were holding their team sergeant up by his legs, standing in the gore on the stairs so their sergeant could reach behind the exit sign. "Why there, Sergeant? Why not somewhere else? Won't it miss?" While he fiddled with the device and jammed it in place, his sergeant answered, "Most of the blast will bounce off the walls in both directions. The balls in the mine will hit the slope of the stone ceiling here and bounce down to where we sheltered on the way in. If the Lee guys pull back here and stop after they hit our little surprise at the desk, this is where they'd stack up to make the next assault. Now shut da hell up so I can work. We only got a few more seconds before the guard platoon's on us. Done. Down. Don't step on my wire, or we're all gonna have a real bad day. Jonas stopped and pulled a chunk of cracked upper torso armor and body over to where he'd been kneeling when he tossed his grenade earlier. His team sergeant demands, "Da fuck re you doing, private? Get you ass movin'." He pulled the pin and balanced the grenade on the stairs with the flat of the spoon down. Jonas carefully pulled the bloody soft parts of the ripped torso into place and mumbled, "Just a sec, Sergeant. When they mess with this to get it out of their way, the grenade will pop off the spoon springs and bounce around on the stairs. We'll hear 'em comin' even if they decide to stop here before rushing us." Suddenly approving of the idea, his sergeant snapped, "Right, fine, hurry." The specialist and his team sergeant were both looking down their weapon sights at the base of the stairs as Jonas was nearly finished a second later. His team sergeant and Jonas heard the reaction platoon running in the corridor below, and Jonas heard his own heart quicken. His sergeant hissed urgently behind him and barely heard over the ringing in his ears, "Hurry!" Frustrated with trying to get the thing to balance and out of time, Jonas just pushed the armored back down into the grenade, smashing it into the exposed skin and guts that were stuck gruesomely to the ripped edges of the armor before lunging up the stairs. He fell around the corner as enemy rounds cracked over his head from the reaction platoon, returning the tinking puffs coming from his team's silenced assault rifles. They were falling back fast and heedless for an instant. Fortunately, only a few steps. Their sergeant cuffed both of them by the neck and pulled them up short of the tripwire. He violently wrenched and twisted their collars and pointed their noses down to remind them both about the tripwire. He did not let up his white-knuckled grasp until he had watched them both step carefully over the tripwire for their explosively lethal trap. The three of them, at full sprint, ran up the overturned dresser, now blocking the door, and dove into the room and around the corners to cover. The CEO and wife were now on the right side of the room. The barricade was now mostly shifted to that side to provide cover there now. Another small remote detonated claymore was hidden in a ransacked pile on the left side pointing at the door. The windows on the opposite side of the room from the fireplace were blocked with furniture. The remaining medic, squad leader, and one troop were slowly pushing the giant bed over to the balcony porch doors, before working unsuccessfully to upend it and block the balcony doors. Once the bed was in place, it took all of them minus the one on guard at the entry, their wounded, and the prisoner guard to upend the heavy oak decorative bed piece. The massive thick wood and grossly thick mattress smashed firmly into the doors and wall. The heavy mattress and the big boxy thing under it even fell from the frame, further tangling and blocking the doors. Their cushioned mass might even serve to deaden the impact of a breaching charge. After the crash, they all turned back to their positions. Jonas could see his corporal's staring eyes open and blank, his face blue and staring at the ceiling in a widely spread puddle of blood. He looked exactly the same as in the village dive shop, with his face perfect but sickly frozen still. But now he was mangled with a giant syringe of medical suspension serum in his heart, uniform top ripped open and patches laid over the largest wounds. Many of his wounds still lay leaking and unplugged. Jonas knew instantly that sticking him with the suspension serum was a desperate move to save him that had not worked. Jonas did not have time to think about it before his squad leader pushed him to the door and ordered, "Mind outer perimeter security." Informing his team of the obvious, their squad leader told them quietly, "He bled out." We couldn't stop the bleeding fast enough. He's gone. His team sergeant was lying chest down on the floor at the edge of their barricade, looking through an intentional gap at the bottom with the dental mirror. He waved Jonas and the specialist against the wall at his feet, pulled out his extra mags, and handed the ammunition up to them. He very deliberately pressed his finger to his lips, telling them to be quiet. Jonas watched the chemical assault rifle in hand, back-pressed to the stone wall, as his squad leader sent 2 men from the other team down the secret corridor that the CEO had opened behind the fireplace. His squad leader did not say a word. He made his intent known by pointing at them, reversing his hand, pointing a finger into each of his own eyes, and finally a flat knife hand across the darkened room into the still open tunnel. His Bravo team squad mates disappeared looking for an escape route they could use. Chapter 115. Captain Brockish barked with calm confidence. Cruiser sections 1 through 8 form on warsong, oriented to 0 polar. The captain calmly released his comm and spoke to his own crew. Take us north. Helm fire control plot angle of intercept so we come in high on the port rear third of priority target Alpha 01. Ensure 80% probability we're clear of friendly fire deflection from fleet to target. Refine the solution and get it to me soonest. Depressing his comm button again, all other sections maintain ground support mission and security for inbound dropships. Rear guard units ensure good retrans relay with the fleet. Maintain mission for ground cover force. The mobile force will rejoin this position. Flotilla chain of command by seniority of ship's captains. Samson asked quietly from his unfamiliar position, standing next to the ship's captain. You're really going to do this? I mean, travel halfway around the world to engage one target? Confused by the question, Captain Brockish nearly snapped. Why not? Samson asked, trying to learn the details of space. Well, it's halfway around the world. As soon as he asked, he felt like he'd sounded decidedly stupid and fearful. That thought irritated him. The captain demanded, So what? Whispering fiercely, Samson corrected, Well, how in the hell do you propose to get there, Captain? Understanding dawning, Captain Brockish rolled his eyes up, above angrily pinched lips, to consider for a second, and then slapped his palm to his touch screen, swiping it left. The brisk action instantly cleared the screen of his command work. He pulled a minimized screen labeled innocuously ship status. He placed a finger below a rapidly climbing triple-digit number that had just passed over 200. Hi, Commander, that's our relative speed. Samson snapped. We'll take for bloody ever to get there, Captain. What are you thinking? The captain slammed his eyes shut and crushed his teeth together in anger and frustration. He whispered fiercely, Hi, Commander, slap yourself. You're on a fucking warship. We're not in some atmospheric clunker. This high in orbit, we can run up to 450 kilometers per second without atmospheric vibrations. He calmed quickly as he realized both who he was talking to and that he had time to explain while others worked. That will have us on top of our target in the northern hemisphere opposite of us in under 10 minutes and decelerating back into these station keeping positions in under 30 minutes. And the cruisers are bloody well faster than us. By the time we hit that bastard at this altitude, we'll be on him going so fast we'll be over the horizon again in under 3 minutes. That's 6 solid salvos from our chemical-driven kinetic rockets, and maybe a 7th if we're lucky, and they stay focused on the fleet working on the remains of that platform. Either way, we can't let those bastards bring their guns to bear on our fleet in coordination with what remains of that defensive platform. We've already lost 2 capital ships, a dozen battlecruisers like this one, and more cruisers than I care to count. Samson asked quietly, We've already lost that many ships. Nodding the affirmative, "Correct, High Commander." Flicking his finger, Captain Brockish cleared the ship's status screen and pulled a scrolling message from the bottom which turned into a damage plot for the entire fleet. He spoke calmly and clearly. Dreadnoughts alone carry 10 to 12,000 officers and sailors each. Even degraded, those platforms are tough to crack. In the hour and 15 that they have been pounding on each other, the station has taken the worst of it, pointing to one side of the display carroted in red, with ever-increasing amber and red components. But our guys are taking hits too, as he grazed his finger down the left side of the screen showing ship names and class designations, sorted by size from largest to smallest. Many were blacked out, indicating destroyed outright, or for healthy ship names in green through amber to red for severely damaged ships. The number winking out of existence into the black was unsettling. It was another unsettling aspect of space battle that they were all in the same battle, but the customary sights and sounds of that fight were absent. It was just eerie silence and streaming data. The captain looked at the counter and briefly at his two bridge officers to check their progress before realizing he still had time and continued, "Our pack of wolves is going to get in behind the focused, partially blinded, and bleeding bear. He has little to severely degraded over the horizon capabilities because we've been smashing the satellites on the other side of the planet. They will have only seconds' notice before we are over the horizon and capable of engaging them if they receive any notice at all. Polar regions don't generally carry many communications or observation satellites. That's why we entered this way, and we are coming back up this way now. We're going to pass over his back and hammer what would be this bear's left rear leg, hobbling him." Samson asked, looking at the relative sizes. "But that's a League dreadnought out there on the other side." The captain blurted out, "Correct. And they can't shield their thrust while they burn forward through the resistance of the upper atmosphere to intercept the fleet. The thrust they are putting out needs to go somewhere. They can keep their front and waist shielding up, but drop their back to a minimum to maintain acceleration and not burn in their own trapped plasma inside their shielding." Understanding dawned on Samson as he nodded and said, "Ah, so that's why admirals prefer to attack from the rear or head-on if they must. They can pass each other, spinning their ships to keep both shields pointed at the enemy and keep hammering away at each other without exposing their ship to crippling propulsion damage." Nodding his approval, Captain Brockish complimented, "Excellent. You got it in one. Well done, sir. They can coast in the deep vacuum of space, but larger maneuvers need main engines even there. We'll make an admiral out of you yet." Shaking his head no in refusal, Samson said, "Not a chance. So we're going to force this bastard to either take it up the tail from us, or turn his ship lengthwise and split the difference along his broadside between us and the rest of the fleet." Pleased, the captain answered, "Those are his options, and it's time for me to get back to work." Samson looked up at the forward view screen, showing a pristine white planetary curve at the very bottom. The captain started barking orders. "Fires helm, looks good. Plan approved. Comms, pulse the course corrections to the rest of our flotilla. Tell them to adjust the course on Warsong. Helm, begin adjustments. Now." Chapter 116. Jonas had hardly heard anything but the ringing and occasional shouted order since the first squad of Celesta's League guards had tried to force the room and eaten the blast from the claymore hidden behind the desk. 1 second they were there. There was a chest-pounding whump that was so loud it made his nuts and underarms hurt. Then they were all gone in a gray-brown dust cloud, the only sound he or the rest of them had heard for many minutes after had been ringing in their ears. that was broken by the angry shouts and momentary scramble up the stairs by a cluster of enemies. Their exposure was met by a hail of his team's silenced rounds, dropping 4 more. The grenade he had hidden exploded with a thump somewhere down the stairs. They held for nearly 30 minutes now. They had 2 more walking wounded who were patched, the specialist from his own team and the other team's sergeant who had a patched but nasty scratch. Their 2 walking wounded were guarding the entrance to the passage out for now. They discovered that the passage ended in a guarded seaside hangar. Of course, none of them wanted to enter that without some much heavier weapons, since there they'd be facing armored and regular troops. Plus, they'd have no cover once they left the passageway. Their squad leader had most of them watching the windows for an additional breach element trying to flank them from the balcony. Jonas and his team sergeant were left alone to guard the hallway. There were so many of the enemy platoon bunched up on the stairs where they had staged their own assault that he could practically feel them breathing. He pointed to the remote mine clacker furiously. Jonas was out of the enemy's sight, but wanted to detonate the device immediately. He was answered with a slap to the hand from his team sergeant. His glare broke away from the dental mirror, and a furious shake of his head told Jonas not to mention it again. Frustrated, Jonas mouthed, "Why?" Rolling his eyes, Jonas' team sergeant pulled a pen from his thigh pocket where he kept his little paper notebook and wrote on the bottom panel of the overturned dresser they were hiding behind, "Wait for suit armor." Understanding dawned for Jonas as he shook his head yes. They could not kill the suits with their current little chemical-fired weapons. The explosives would have to do it for them when they came up the stairs. He pulled his 3rd of 4 grenades. He tapped his team sergeant on the shoulder to get his attention and pointed down the hall. His team sergeant nodded no, but did not get frustrated this time. Jonas took his pen and scribbled on the bottom of the dresser, "Yes. It will either call them forward so we can kill the suits, or the suits are outside and waiting for attack orders, and those guys are just waiting there all night and blocking us in." His team sergeant cursed silently. He looked around quickly and tossed a splinter, so it hit their squad leader to draw his attention. Waving him over, he pointed at the grenade and then showed him Jonah's message. Their squad leader looked at the windows. That was where he would be waiting for orders to breach, where he ran that unit. He turned his head left, and from behind the wall looked at where the enemy platoon would be waiting in attack or blocking positions along the stairs their own squad had used to enter. Then he looked back at their drug-sedated and bound prisoners. He finally decided and made it known by nodding and tossing his chin from the grenade down the hall to the enemy. Jonas stood and pulled his slung rifle across his chest with his left hand. He pulled the pin with his left index finger and popped the spoon into his left hand, careful not to let it fly and clatter. With the live grenade in hand, he offered a warning, stepped back, and sent an underhand toss straight down the corridor. The grenade bounced once on the bloodied hallway floor, between the alcove and corner, but before the downward landing stairs, with a solid metallic ring before it slapped the far wall. It rebounded, dropping down to the landing and out of sight. The slow arch and length of the throw left almost no time between when they watched the grenade drop out of sight. They pulled back to cover, and then the violent whump that passed through their body parts in contact with the stone. As the sound of the explosion died to nothing, it was replaced by shouts of pain, a stream of curses and orders from below. Chapter 117. Warsong shuddered a second time under the launch of its own chemical rocket launchers, firing in volleys at the targeted battleship. The offending giant's 4 escort battle cruisers and a swarm of cruisers had already leaped ahead of their charge to screen her from the fleet that had been pounding on the platform until the arrival of the League battle group. The smaller escort vessels were out of range around the curve of the world and unable to turn around to engage Captain Brockish's flotilla in time without turning their unshielded engines to the main fleet's devastating firepower to reverse thrust, dropping speed to 0 and accelerate back. Captain Brockish rapidly swiped his fingers over his own display, while Samson watched over his shoulder, pulling their target into closer perspective as their course brought them rocketing in behind the Leviathan. He rapidly tapped the screen, bringing the tail of the enemy ship into a centered focus, then slipped a finger down a graduated scale on the far left side of his screen. That delicate movement pulled the massive but shredded port engine nacelle into a view that quickly filled his screen and then pushed back out a hair as Captain Brockish instantly corrected his overshot zoom. With a roll of his hand to the right, he pulled with pinky and right ring finger from a minimized portion of his display a red targeting reticle. He barked, "Fires! Adjust fire my mark. Comms, relay focus fire my mark." Their oblique course would have them overshooting the back spine of the battleship and crossing behind the ship's engines. In the 30-plus seconds that they had been exposed to the capital ship, it had already begun to spit fire back at them and their escorts from batteries that were not already engaged with the rest of the fleet. The communications and fires officers had silently and already completed their tasks using their own control panels and were refining their solutions and sorting their own incoming reports. The captain spoke again. "Comms, pick the uppermost cruiser in formation and have them pop up from our formation until they have line of sight communications over the curve of the world to the rest of our fleet. They are free to defensively maneuver at will, but have them double time." The order was given without looking back to Samson. He spoke quietly to him. "We need the fleet's targeting data relayed through that cruiser." The battleship's captain knocked out the fleet's upper picket ships, who were relaying to us as soon as we appeared behind him. "He's smart, and he killed our link to the fleet, hoping to degrade us. We'll need to adjust our course in a few moments." Fleet was a little lower in the gravity well than they were when we started our run and lost comms with them. Samson struggled to visualize the three-dimensional battle from his two-dimensional battle training. He asked quietly, "The fleet's adjusted angle of attack puts us passing directly through the fleet's overshot rounds. Do we need to drop closer to the planet to duck under their rounds?" While he'd been speaking, a murderous barrage of laser fire, steel penetrators, and lastly explosive rockets had been pouring into the exposed engine nacelle while displayed on the bridge screen. Nodding quickly to Samson, Captain Brockish amended, "Correct. I'd wanted to pass above them, so we looked like an open and lazy V. That way both the main fleet and we would be firing down into a central point. That would have made the enemy's escape more difficult. Instead, the fleet moved. It looks like the cripples and capitals are using the platform's mass as cover from the second powerful target. While they are frustrating the battleship's gunners, the move puts us a little out of position. The battleship's gunners don't want to hit their own station. Our fleet, on the other hand, doesn't mind which they hit. It's a smart move on the part of our guys to help rotate and protect our ships. While that's happening, our faster cruisers, destroyers, and lancers spread their formation, maneuvering randomly while firing into the target. We'll need to look like and now drop ourselves below the curve and use the world itself as a shield. Better to keep our guys alive so we can fight again later than add extra risks getting too aggressive chasing a ship that might still get away. The steady drum of their own railguns and lasers passed largely unnoticed through the hull until the third salvo of rockets pounded out from their hull on their lethal collision course with the targeted warship. That volley marked a full 60 seconds that had elapsed since their opening salvo. Comms barked, "Relay data coming in." Captain Brockish cursed as he saw the information. "Shit. Helm, drop bow 15 degrees. Comms, relay adjust to escorts." Samson watched as the perspective on the massive enemy ship, even over such a long range, actually began to subtly shift. The captain pulled his targeting reticle to a lower portion on the battleship's firmly C-shaped and shattered nacelle. Fires barked before Captain Brockish spoke, acknowledged, adjusting fire. Captain Brockish spoke. Comms, relay targeting. The other officer's fingers were dancing and danced for a second before he spoke. Working. Finished. Message sent captain. The captain smoothly acknowledged. Thank you, comms. Samson felt a new shudder under his feet and looked down as the captain noticed it too. Helm, adjust course. We're skipping on the Atmo under us. Keep us at this same relative altitude. Keep us stable for our gunnery cruise and drop speed to maximum adjusting for this atmospheric density. The officer barked an acknowledgement as he acted. I captain, adjusting course. The captain ordered, comms, relay adjustments. Comms replied, sent, captain. The ship lurched down and away from Samson's feet. In the same instant, his ears registered a crushing metallic wham. Samson stumbled as the deck slammed back into his feet from weightlessness. His legs tangled and twisted like he was a staggering drunk as his brain struggled to regain awareness of what felt for an instant like a tilted and canted floor that his eyes told him was still level. Helm, evasion, double time. The bone-jarring thump of their rocket launchers marked their fourth salvo and 90 seconds of the fight. Samson did not realize his hand was in a white-knuckled fist on the back of Captain Brockish's command chair until the other sat back again, bumped his fist with his back, and turned back to look at him before instantly returning to his displays. Captain Brockish quickly but quietly explained without prompt. Battleship round. We counter-track their big guns automatically, and our navigation computer randomizes our path away from their track. I drove our flotilla straight line to avoid the cloud of friendly fire passing above the target. I missed the friendly rounds, but that one enemy round got through. Samson grumped, wonderful. Without any humor or animation in his voice, the captain responded, we're evading again. Our screens can handle their little rounds. Our damps adjust our perceived inertia, so we do not feel the jukes. That last round grazed across our top screens about a third of the way back from our bow. When it catches us center mass, we'll just crack like an egg. Samson wondered sarcastically, wonderful. The crushing hammer of rockets pouring out from their hull in volleys marked another 30 seconds past. Samson looked closely at the targeted nacelle again. He could see the shredding impact of thousands of combined laser strikes heating and boiling the armor in and around the nacelle. He watched as white lightning strikes from rail gun rounds slammed into the softened meter's thick metal and surrounding armor, peeling it back and shredding it like so many ants pulling at a stick of butter on a hot day. The cruisers did not mount many rocket systems, but Samson could see their individual fiery blasts. But in a black blink, he watched their own massed cluster of rockets pass through the engine's superheated, but now greatly diminished plasma and slam into weakened armor on the far side of the shattered nacelle. The crushing, but vacuum silenced, the impact of the high explosive rockets buckled the far side armor, blackening the battleship's port engine. Captain Brockish's finger blocked Samson's view as he dragged his targeting reticle into the bottom right quarter of the damaged and offline engine itself. Samson noticed that they were looking up into the engine, but almost directly into its depth now. Fires, adjust fire, comms, relay. The dual affirmative answers were parroted as their ship lurched as again their rockets fired, this time into the blackened depths of the engine itself. The visual of the now crippled capital ship began to slew oddly, almost like the circular engine ports were ovaling. They watched silently as more invisible lasers, friction-whitened kinetic rounds played like lightning in the darkened engine, and blasts from other ships' rockets popped like firecrackers in the black. Samson could hear the wicked smile in the captain's voice. Watch this. Again, silently, the blossom of their concentrated rockets ripped into a fiery and shredding heat. This time, shredded components and debris were ripped out of the engine's guts by the high explosives and tossed like a cloud of dirty vomit into space. Without an ounce of humor in his voice, the captain fired at the enemy through his own screen. "Let's see you restart that one, you bastards." His thumb slapped the long-forgotten by Samson graduated scale along the left side of the screen, dragging the view out. He rapidly tapped the screen, recentering on the bottom one of the two centered engines. The Leviathan was now slowly turning and wounded. Captain Brockish quickly pulled his targeting reticle so it sat between the 12 and 2 o'clock positions, just inside the plasma stream. Fires, adjust fire. Fires snapped while working. Done, Captain. Comms broke in quickly and smoothly. Captain, comms relaying. The captain snapped. Thank you, comms. The next salvo of rockets leaped from their ship with the now familiar volley of fire. The perspective on the turning target's engines that had been ovaling stabilized as the incredibly fast-moving flotilla continued to streak past the battleship's rear. The captain demanded, "Helm at present speed and altitude. How long until we are over the curve of the world and out of direct fire engagement range?" The helm officer's fingers were already moving as he pulled open a new screen and let the computer run the evasion routine unsupervised. He droned, "Ah, 1 second, Captain." Calculating. Like a blade scraping over steel, the captain reminded harshly, "Seconds count, helm." "Captain, helm, 75 seconds, mark." Irritated, the captain swore, "Crap. Understood, helm. Recalculate and reset the course and reduce speed for 120 seconds of engagement time. Comms, relay maneuver when complete." The helm officer was already calculating while the captain refined his orders, his fingers flying over a screen Samson could not see past his back. "Captain, helm, done and executing." "Captain, comms, adjustments sent." Samson felt his stomach lurch as their ship suddenly flipped end over end and began pounding out thrust into the direction they were traveling, slowing their hundreds of kilometers per second speed substantially. Then he felt the same nauseating sensation again as what his eyes were seeing on their large forward-facing view screens. Starfield flipped, but his ears did not sense any motion again. The disorientation of the maneuver, coupled with the bridge's forward view screen that was technically focused deep into space, somewhere far from what he still knew as his, and their ships left, was doubly frustrating. His eyes, ears, and natural awareness of direction all disagreed, creating a sickening disorientation. Instantly, as soon as the targeting solutions stabilized, their volley-fired rockets leapt from the launchers. Since the rockets traveled at relatively conventional speeds as opposed to the lasers and relativistic speeds from their railguns, they could be perturbed by the maneuver, so held fire until complete. The concentrated photons and thousands of railgun rounds were swallowed apparently harmlessly into the plasma of the massive engine. The light from the engine appeared to flicker for a second as their large volley of rockets sensed the heat, and instead of allowing the warheads to melt harmlessly, they automatically detonated in the engine's plasma stream. The captain mocked the enemy with a flat voice, which everyone knew required no reply. "That's it, you bastards. Keep swallowing your own engine backwash. See how long your heat damping can run in overload before you have to vent or drop thrust. I'm going to shove my hurt stick so far up your tailpipe that when it blows, you're going to go nose down into Atmo at speed and rip yourself apart." Samson watched over the other man's shoulder as Captain Brockish leaned close to his screen, supremely interested in something he was seeing, but Samson could not see. The captain gently, almost lovingly, stroked his screen, repositioning his targeting reticle slightly out of the plasma stream and up to just below the 1 o'clock positions on the rounded nacelle. The captain cocked his head as Samson leaned in close, looking over his shoulder, while completely unaware of Samson and only watching the faintest ripples in the engine plasma. Yet another salvo of their rockets crashed out from the hull. This time, when the captain spoke, his voice almost sounded like a question. "Fires, calms, if you would please relay adjusted targeting time." He waited for a second in silence, holding his officers in thrall as they waited for his command. Their rockets converged and detonated in the plasma stream, causing the enemy engine to flicker as the feedback rippled through, then cleared from their systems. Now. Both officers tapped their screens in the same instant, and their completion notifications were ignored by the captain, who remained fascinated with his screen. Since they and their escort ships were not shooting directly into the plasma anymore, Samson could occasionally see some of the cruiser's larger rail guns and their own streak like white lightning, dipping into the plasma and creating what appeared to be tiny puffs of metal being stripped from the gigantic nacelle. Samson was not thinking, but his mouth moved before his brain caught it, and he asked, "How big are those rail guns that I'm seeing?" He felt another volley of rockets leave their hull. With little more than a twitch of his shoulders, representing a shrug, the captain answered, "Mediums. The small ones are really hard to see at this range. Anything below 12 to 15 centimeters would just look like nothing. The atmosphere isn't thick enough to really light up under the friction of something that small." Samson shook his head, struggling to imagine rounds that large. The absolute largest he had personally held and fired was 10 millimeters. Pistols carried around generally between 1 and 5 millimeters, while assault Gauss generally fired 3 to 7 millimeter projectiles. Samson's mind boggled at the weapon calibers being casually mentioned as too small to notice. The captain continued nonchalantly, "We have nothing in this flotilla of battleship caliber like the one they bounced off us a little while ago. That was a 37-centimeter main gun round." Entered into the conversation as a coincidental aside, the captain casually mentioned, "Each one of those rounds mass just over a metric ton, accelerated to a large fraction of light speed. The force and energy on impact is enough to make a planet hurt. A deliberately placed volley could crack the crust of a world if they dropped into a fault line." He looked pointedly from Samson back to the ship, before flicking his eyes back to Samson again and down to his screen, his desire to kill the battleship painfully clear in the vitriol behind his eyes. The same sentiment coursed through Samson's own veins, but the cold, ruthless side of him formed a thought and leaned forward to quietly speak into the captain's ear. "That was over a quarter-century ago, Captain. The crew from that ship are either dead or on the planet below us somewhere in retirement. The crew flying that ship today is an entire generation of sailors removed from that atrocity. Rip her guts out and drop her from the fight, but keep that ship available for salvage and sale. We gain nothing by destroying it. We pay for the ground component of this campaign by capturing and salvaging that capital ship." The captain visibly twitched and pulled his head and cheeks to the side as he fought down his own deep-seated anger and struggled with the pragmatic order. He silently fussed, hemmed, and hawed behind his bridge officers, where they could not see before he cursed fiercely, "Shit." Samson calmly and quietly reminded the older officer, "Our mission isn't to destroy that ship itself. It is to bring the offending crew to Earth, so we can try them for genocide along with the command structure and that corporatized empire's leadership who approved of and then ordered the strike." Their rocket launchers thumped another volley into the silence of space. The captain repeated his curse, Shit. He shook his head and started to bark orders. Fire control, maintain selected fire. Comms, patch a relay through us to the fleet and our escorts. Open channel to that ship. Captain Comms standing by. Captain Brockish began without a preamble or ceremony of any kind. His voice was as cold and hard as frozen oxygen. Celesta's League battleship. This is the Hegemony Guardsman battlecruiser Warsong Surrender. Cease all hostile action. Max, elevate your weapons away from Hegemony vessels. Drop your acceleration to station keeping and signal your acceptance of surrender, or we will gut your drives and send you tumbling and accelerating into the planet's gravity well and atmo. You will break, tumble, burn, fall, and crash land on your civilians below if you resist. You have 30 seconds to comply. Surrender your ship or die by fire.
Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate your listening. When you get a chance, please come and hit the like, subscribe, leave a comment, and check out the book for real down in the description.